If you're like me, chances are you're bummed that the Olympics are not happening this summer. But don't worry, we can fill some of our time with a brand new game called the Great State Bailout. And if you're not paying attention, it's going to come to a state near you. I come to you today to actually talk about this because it's happening in my state of Illinois and its attempt to do the unthinkable in the middle of this pandemic panic. You see, Democrat and Republican administrations alike have kicked the fiscal can down the road for the past 3 decades or so. And now that a state government-mandated shutdown has not so shockingly dried up the tax revenues, our fine friends in Springfield have decided it's time to have mommy and daddy, aka the federal government, bail them out. Oh, no, by the way, not just bailing them out for the shutdown and the billions of dollars that are not collected in taxes, but also for all of their horrible decisions that have led to this state's bond rating tanking faster than Gretchen Whitmer's stock in the Democratic VP race. This from the Center Square on Monday. Illinois lawmakers, citing the state's pension cost, budget shortfalls, and empty unemployment trust, are asking for more than $40 billion in no-strings-attached aid from the federal government. Yes, J.B. Pritzker and company, who decided to put this state on lockdown and suffer those consequences, apparently don't want to actually suffer the consequences. It appears they're just assuming that a bailout will come their way from the federal government. Or another way of putting it, hey, rest of America, you're going to bail us out for all of our poor decisions that had nothing to do with COVID-19. After 30-plus years of bad decisions, accounting tricks, and flat-out lies, Illinois' governmental chickens are coming home to roost. But the folks in Springfield are telling the biggest whopper of them all. Their request is all about saving essential services. You see, on April 14th, State Senate President Dan Harmon wrote a letter to the state's congressional delegation asking for their help in this matter. Quote, Illinois could see an estimated revenue loss of $14.1 billion for 2020-2021 due to this pandemic. This loss would deplete approximately one-third of Illinois' general funds in one fiscal year, significantly impacting state services and long-term obligations, unquote. What Harmon is referring to as state services is Illinois' underfunded for years unemployment fund. Those long-term obligations, well, the thing that they've never wanted to really deal with ever, the state pension funds that are insolvent beyond belief. Now, lest you think that this is just jockeying for that CARES Act money, that money has already been earmarked for every state. This is an additional request, one that Harmon and his friends were hoping would go unnoticed too. Now, to set this all up, the Tax Foundation is telling us that the state of Illinois is set to get some $3.5 billion of the $4.9 billion earmarked from the CARES Act, with the rest going to city and county governments via a convoluted formula that I'm not going to bore you with here. Consider the state is also asking for some $43 billion. 3.5 seems like a drop in the bucket, right? But something's not adding up between the math of Pritzker and Harmon, let alone the requested amount. You see, just last week, Pritzker said that the budget hole for the ongoing fiscal year would be some $2.7 billion, and the missing budget piece for next fiscal year, beginning on July 1st, would be at about $4.6 billion. Added up, that's $7.3 billion in budgetary shortfalls. I don't know about you, but that's a far cry from the $14.1 billion shortfall that Harmon is projecting. And it seems to put the governor and his ally in the state Senate at odds. It also suggests that maybe, just maybe, this is a ploy to help get them to clean up their mess that they've created over the past 30 years. Never let a crisis go to waste. So how did Harmon come up with a $40 billion request, which, even if we take his projected budget shortfall at face value, is a whopping 185% more than would be required to cover that shortfall? Let's break it down just a bit, though. He wants $15 billion of that money going right into the coffers of the state, helping to clean up budget holes for the rest of this fiscal year, all of 2021, and the start of fiscal 2022. That would suggest, if we're doing the math, that the start of fiscal 2022 requires $7 billion, because as we just discussed, Pritzker's budget shortfall projections add up to $7.3 billion. Are we really supposed to buy that? Or could it be that either Pritzker or Harmon's math is just way off? But the real gold in this request by Harmon is still to come. That's because a quarter of the $40 billion request comes in the form of state pension relief. Now, if you're not a resident of the state of Illinois, I'd suggest that having $10 billion of your federal tax money going to bail out a state that got itself into that mess would be a thing to be upset over. Harmon frames the argument that without the $10 billion bailout for the pension system, well, they're just going to have to cut back on essential services due to the unsustainable obligations. Those obligations, $138 billion in state pension funding and another $54 billion in future healthcare costs related to those pensions. Not only does Harman want to direct $10 billion of cash infusion, he also wants to take advantage of the insanely low interest rates for loans backed by the federal government. Nothing like 2 times at the federal trough to feed the state's problem pension program. The gravy train from the feds is not supposed to stop there either. You see, Harman wants another $9.6 billion sent to the cities and towns in the state, aka Chicago. And trust me, Mayor Lori Lightfoot would love nothing more than to receive the lion's share of that money too, because, much like the state, the city has kicked its financial can down the road for so long that it's facing some difficult choices, finally. Talk about a win for Lightfoot here, though. She gets to keep all of her donor base happy, not have to make the difficult choices that are actually needed, and keep the ultra-liberals in the city happy. That's a trifecta for electoral success in the future in Chicago if I've ever seen one. But here's the deal. Harman isn't done bailing out failing programs either, as he's asking for some $6 billion to be earmarked for unemployment funding. Well, why would that be needed? Because last time I checked here in the state was already preparing to allow so-called gig economy workers to collect unemployment in May. That means they were already supposed to have been bumping that number up. But it's likely because the state has never taken funding the insurance program seriously before. According to an analysis by Mark Glennon and Ted Dabrowski, the state has the 4th worst funded unemployment insurance program in the country. So why not get that pumped up while in the middle of a panic spending spree from the feds, right? It all adds up to the state attempting to suckle at the teat of the rest of America, hoping that they can bail their rear ends out for the decades of their own fiscal insanity. Illinois has passed the buck time and again, and now that the state is facing an economic downturn that was caused largely by its own choices, combined with a pandemic, it's now going to pass the buck to the rest of the country? I'm sorry, but it should be time for the federal government to say, no, you got yourself into this mess. You get yourself out of it, especially since they've already given them money for COVID-19. If they can't survive on a shared fund of nearly $5 billion, as the Tax Foundation has pointed out they're going to get, maybe it's time that the state finally has to make those hard choices that needed to be made decades ago. But when you've got a state government that has never had consequences for its fiscal insanity, what do you expect them to do? Of course they're going to try anything and everything to avoid this for as long as possible. Hopefully the federal government gets wise to this ploy, but I'm not holding my breath. This is just Illinois and its unique issues. So maybe you're wondering why you should be caring at home. You should care, 1, because your tax dollars are at stake. 2, you should care because if it's good for Illinois, you can bet other states are also going to try this trick. And thirdly, you should care because maybe you believe that states should dig themselves out of the messes that they create and not ask those living 3,000 miles away to pay for those mistakes unless they voluntarily decide to transact within your borders. Then again, modern monetary theory, so who cares about money? So let this request be a warning to you to stay vigilant and stay active within your local and state governments. We cannot let them use this pandemic panic to put our country in greater financial peril than it already is in. Don't forget, you can find my show Critical Thinking every Saturday, 5 p.m. Central Time on Mojo 50 Radio and the Mojo 50 Radio Facebook page. And of course, your favorite podcasting platform for those who apparently have something better to do on your weekends stuck at home. Until our next time together, Matthew 5:44.